Hey everyone, and welcome to the Higher Estate. My name is Dr. Ira Price, and this is where we talk about all things related to cannabis, and we bridge the gap between the medical and lifestyle worlds and all things in between. I have an amazing guest here today. He's just an awesome human all around. I'm going to call him a friend, not even a guest, because I've met him. I met him once before, and we were the last time I saw him was a couple. Actually, probably about 2 years ago now in California. We were at Cannabis Retreats in Malibu. What an amazing environment to be in. Anyways, I have Eben Britton here today, and he's just an amazing human, all around human. He's a ex-NFLer, played a really tough position, and a huge cannabis advocate as well. He's been a podcaster. Man, this is a guy who's literally had a whole bunch of lives in one life, and he's one of the most mindful humans I know. And honestly, that's one of the reasons that I'm so drawn to the things that he's been doing, and I've been following him for so long, because I see a lot of similarities in some ways, and then obviously he's taken it to such a great extent in his business life, his professional life, and his private life. I met your wife, Britt, when we were, she came out as well, and that was amazing. Anyways, hello.
Hey, brother.
Thanks
for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. And I've been watching all the stuff that you're doing lately. And it's just amazing where you all the shit that you've done, bro. And so I have to do this disclaimer. It happens every time. My mother hates that I swear, and I have a lot of swear. I have a lot of swear in me. It's like it all comes out at one time. I think it's passion. She thinks it's she used to go. Yeah, totally. She used to come on and give me all these nasty ratings saying, I can't give you a good rating because you're swearing. Anyway, that's my mom for you. She loves me. So, yeah, man, it's been good. So you're I really wanted to get started with who's Eben, man? I've seen so much of you're a footballer, and yet you're one of the most mindful people I know. You're, it's just amazing. You're an offensive lineman who does yoga every day. How does that happen? Where did that start?
Good question. Who is Eben?
I know it's such a tough, it's so tough, right? But
well, man, I've kind of gotten to this place where I know I'm off track anytime I'm identifying myself as any one particular thing. And I felt the, complete devastation mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually coming out of my football career, having spent, 20 years of my life identifying myself as a football player.
That's a good point, actually. The identification of being a football player. How does one identify themselves, and how do you remove yourself from that? Yeah, it's a good point.
Yeah, absolutely, man. So how did I become, how do I rectify being a football player turned yogi?
Yeah.
Well, it really, I have to give the credit to my parents, and that goes along with the cannabis storyline as well. I was raised by people who were very holistically minded individuals. They believed that food is medicine. You take care of yourself through the foods you eat, how much exercise you get, drinking plenty of water, and the body really does the work from there. You provide the environment, and your body really knows what to do at the end of the day. And there's a lot of natural holistic practices, herbal remedies, etc., that help our body along the way.
Did your parents, growing up, how did you get into football then? You mentioned that, your parents are these holistic humans, and I'm assuming, so you have a close relationship with your family?
Yeah, very close relationship with my really my whole family. I mean, there's a lot of alcoholism, a lot of mental health disease in my family, depression, anxiety, etc. As a crew, we've really been through the shitter together, experienced a lot of highs, a lot of lows, but at the end of the day, we've found a way to come together, find forgiveness for each other, and, learn how to move on and be in the gratitude of, having people who really have your back, in your life.
Did they push you into football, or did you push yourself into it growing up? Like, sounds
Not
like...
at all. Yeah, actually, my mom never wanted me to play football, and she thought that I would get hurt. So I had this somewhere along the line. I bring it back to being probably about 8 or 9 years old, being up at my grandparents' house in Connecticut over the summers, watching the news and seeing the Jets and the Giants in training camp on the news, and thinking, man, I want to be one of those warriors when I grow up.
Yeah.
I want to be one of those guys, one of those athletes. And, my mom wouldn't let me play. She thought I would always get hurt. Finally, my freshman year of high school came along, and with the help of my dad, we convinced my mom that, it was time for me to take a shot at this football thing. I'd always wanted to play. She never wanted me to play. I mean, I was always one of the biggest kids in class.
Bro, you're huge. Like, you're tall. Like, you're super fucking tall.
I was always one of the biggest kids.
Yeah.
So finally she let me play, and really, from the day I stepped foot on the football field my freshman year, I was just surrounded by people who believed in me. I had the athleticism, I was gifted with the size, so I had sort of the tangible necessities that are required to get to the level of playing in the NFL. But, from the time I stepped on the field, it was really before that, because in 8th grade, I started training with this trainer, and it was super intense, 3 days a week.
In
Sprint
8th grade?
out at the park, weight training, and then from the time I was about 12, my mom started taking my brother and I to yoga.
Sorry, why were you doing that in 8th grade? I mean, funny enough, I'm definitely never did anything pro, but I was a rugby player my whole life. Starting, training 3 days a week, training every morning, doing all that in 8th grade, that takes a toll. Why, you're, out with your friends. What, you just wanted to? What were you training?
This wasn't like feel good training. This was like weight training and sprint work until I puked.
What? Sorry, in 8th grade? Like, where were you going with that?
What?
Like 8th grade? Why? Why were you doing that in 8th grade?
I had this vision, man. I was going to make it to the NFL. That was in my mind's eye. I envisioned seeing myself in the NFL playing on Sundays, and I just kept doing it.
Wow.
Everything I did from that, basically from my 8th grade on until the time I got drafted in 2009 to the Jaguars, everything I did, every move I made, everything I ate, everything I thought was about making it to the NFL.
Wow.
And my whole life was built around, realizing this vision of playing in the NFL, playing football on Sundays.
Your mom came around to it in high school?
I mean, my mom now is the insane rabid football fan.
Really?
I'm like, I'm done playing, And she's like, who are we rooting for this year? I like the Raiders. I like John Gruden. I'm all right, Mom, fine. I've never had a dog in the race.
Yeah.
I've been, a fan of the athletes themselves. And coming out of my football career, I like to watch the Jags. I like to watch the Bears.
You never believed in Buffalo, huh?
Buffalo was, to be honest, I took a trip to Buffalo before the draft because they were looking at drafting me.
Really?
So I had a chance to go there, see their whole facility, meet all the coaches and the front office people. I mean, Buffalo was a great organization. It would have been a good place to be.
Yeah. Well,
the place
To play for, maybe not to
the
live.
place you really don't want to end up is Cincinnati.
Right. I don't know. They're similar.
Just because their organization is run.
Yeah.
Just it's like it's like a death march there.
Yeah, for sure. So you got into football in high school. Were you using cannabis back then too?
No, I came to cannabis. I was always very curious about, I come from this long line of, for lack of a better word, witches.
Yeah, I read that. I read that you
mystical people, mystical thinkers,
Yeah.
artists. My father is an artist. My mother is a writer, longtime journalist, ran a lot of fashion magazines in New York City when I was a kid. And my grandmother is an Academy Award-winning actress.
Yeah.
I've got, along with this athletic background, because my dad was also a Division I basketball player, there's this line of artistry and mysticism in my family. And so I guess it's just sort of embedded in my genes that I always had this curiosity towards plant medicines, cannabis. I even remember, looking back because, in my life after the NFL, I've done a handful of plant medicine ceremonies, and, I've really been called to things like ayahuasca and psilocybin as of late, which have been
a lot of people have been
powerful healing tools for me in my life after football. But cannabis, cannabis was something that...
Were you smoking cannabis in high school?
Yeah. But even then, I remember as a teenager getting some idea in my head. I don't know if I think it might have been, I saw this movie Altered States with William Hurt, where he plays this researcher at NYU who goes to New Mexico and has this peyote journey. And then he ends up bringing peyote back to New York, and he gets into a float tank, and he emerges as like this sort of caveman, de-evolved version of himself, and runs amok in the city. And that sort of sparked this idea. I was like, oh, that would be really interesting to go on one of these journeys out in the desert.
I watched The Doors, and remember in the Doors, he did that. He went out there and
I love that.
He had that peyote moment, and actually, that's when I had an experience with peyote. Funny enough, and it was after watching that as well. Anyway, so you were dabbling with it in high school, or you just sort of were like, you were so focused on football, this is what I got to do.
I was so focused on football, this is what I got to do. I was I was always a team captain. I was a team leader. I was a guy that coaches really looked to, to set the example for the team. And so, any thought of, I was very affected by the stigma of cannabis.
Yeah, of course.
God forbid a coach finds out that I, have ever smoked weed or done anything bad, so cannabis, I tried it a couple times. I had some really positive experiences. I also had, I probably in high school smoked weed 3 times. Once was really positive. Actually, I would say 2 times were really positive. Once was a really scary, intense
Everybody's
trip.
got that trip. What was that trip? Tell me that trip. Do you remember? You must remember it perfectly.
Oh my God, yeah. I was, it was after my senior year of football. And a girl who was a friend of mine invited me and my best friend over to her house for a session, a smoke out. And, I was super excited about it, but I was also, very green and wet behind the ears. I didn't have much experience with it. So, we get there, and these kids were all pro stoners at that point. And so it was bong rip after bong rip, and then a blunt started being passed around, and then all of a sudden I noticed the other kids weren't passing the blunt anymore, and it was just me and my buddy passing it back and forth, and then all of a sudden, dude, I just descended into the underground.
Man.
Oh no, I'm so fucking high. I'm floating out of my body.
The voices.
I'm with these fucking stoners. I'm an all-American football player. I've got a scholarship to Arizona. I can't be doing this. Get me out of here.
And you go and there's no coming back for a couple hours when you're in that fucking zone, man.
Oh, dude.
Yeah.
And I got my buddy was totally chill. He's like reading a magazine, like chilling on the couch. He's like, dude, just chill. It's fine.
Did you start praying? I used to start praying when bad shit came. I'd be like, I don't know, anything.
That hasn't kicked in until later. In the last like 5 years, I start praying if I feel like I've got too high.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
So I got him. I was like, dude, we got to get out of here.
Yeah.
And right before then, I was parched. Like I had unbelievable dry mouth.
Yeah.
Drank like 3 massive glasses of water really fast. And I'm like, in this sort of whirlwind, like getting my buddy, I'm like, we gotta go. And then walking through her house to get outside, I grab my backpack, I turn to look at her, and like cartoon wings start like sprouting out of her back.
That's awesome.
I was like,
it's not good.
Holy shit. And I stumble out the front door into the sunlight and I puke all the water all over her front lawn.
That's amazing. Oh, that's amazing.
And I'm like, oh my God, the neighbors, I'm fucked. They're calling the cops.
Yeah, that's usually what happens. They didn't? Oh, you're lucky.
So my buddy and I ended up walking like 3 miles back to my house. And it was one of those fucking epic trips that just, I was like, I'm never smoking weed again.
Yeah, it sounds like a first time psilocybin adventure. You know, it's like a mushroom adventure with the wings and the. It's funny. It reminds me of like how psilocybin literally changed my life. Actually, at one point in time in high school, I didn't realize it probably until last year. One day I'll talk about it, and when I gained that courage to do it. But it's like, you know, you lose your body. You're flying, you're floating, and you see all the stuff around you. Anyway, that's what it sounds like to me. You know, your body was telling you something early on. So you go into you go into the NFL. You're like you're done high school. You head into the NFL, and what happened? So like, you know, actually, I'll tell you, we have very different experiences with Ritalin. I'm going to bring up the Ritalin thing because, you know, I was a high school dropout when I you know, I'm a physician now, and I go around, I talk to other kids who are, you know, high school dropouts and who are trying to get back into school and whatever. But I'll tell you, like, for me, I was in 11th grade, so I was just a senior, but I had like the amount of credits you need to graduate as like a ninth grader. So I was like 2-3 years behind everybody else. But and Ritalin was really new at that time. And, you know, I'm a plant-based guy too, but there was really no plant-based at that time. And I mean, aside from me just being a stoner, and Ritalin really actually at the time helped me. I was told by a doctor after everybody, I've gone through 10, 15 different schools. I got through everything you could possibly imagine. I was told 4th grade, you're never going to graduate. You're going to be a piece of shit, all this stuff. And yeah, I was told that by everybody. I went back one day, funny story. I was working as a physician. I was a resident working in another hospital, and my English teacher comes in. And I'm like, I'm not going to mention his name here. And he says, I recognize you. I go, yeah, you were my 11th grade teacher on my 3rd go. And you told me that I was going nowhere, brother. He's like, oh, well, you know, at least one of you made it out, is what he says to me. Anyway, Ritalin, though, helped me. I was literally on Ritalin from 11th grade, probably until the end of high school. Or no, end of university, which really got, you know. And I was still playing rugby through it. And I had that, you know, you had a letter. I was playing varsity rugby at the time. You had that letter, that exemption to use Ritalin. Yeah. So for me, it really helped. And eventually I got off of it. But you were still using it, or what happened? How did you, like, take me through that adventure of, you know, you go from those experiences you had in high school. You're now in university. Did you start Adderall in university? Is that where it got started, or how did that all happen?
I didn't start taking Adderall until my 2nd year in the NFL.
Really? Why did they start you on Adderall?
Well, I really attribute it to I was in a very dark place. I had a really bad back injury that I was battling through during my second season. I was in a really dark mindset. My cognitive function was really declining. I was super depressed. I felt like I was in a fog. And I attribute that to years, probably at that point, 10 years of untreated subconcussive hits and concussions.
Yeah.
Playing offensive line, you're constantly, and I was a very physical, very violent player, and I had no problem using my head. And, up until probably my last year in Chicago, I never really thought of myself as a guy who got concussions. But of course, coming out of my football career and looking back, I'm like, no shit. Yeah, I definitely had, a handful of concussions. And there are moments from practices specifically where, I took a shot that I was definitely concussed after and then just continued to play because, that was sort of taboo. That was forbidden.
Do you think it was coaching
this time telling them that
right.
maybe I have a concussion? That's like nonsense to me.
Do you think that's a systemic issue within pro athletics? Like not even just football. I see it in most sports where you're brought up through a system that tells you, don't tell me you're injured because coach wants you to play. And if you don't want to play, you're going to be benched. Do you think like, some of that, comes through that mentality?
Absolutely. And, for me, I was a warrior, man.
Yeah.
That's what I do. I go to fucking battle. I'm here to fucking kill people.
Right.
I'm not here to fucking tell you I'm hurt and tell you I can't play. I'm doing whatever it takes. In fact, I feel that it's more endearing to play while hurt, to play while banged up. I had a lot of honor and pride in, being able to push through the pain. So second year of my NFL career, and I'm sitting there and it's a Monday night and we're getting ready to play the Titans. And I'm just like, I can't get out of my own way. I'm just, the game hasn't even started yet. My girlfriend is in town, Brittany, who would soon become my wife later on.
Who's awesome, by the way. She's awesome. It's a pleasure meeting her too.
She's an angel for me.
Did she help save you, by the way? Just as an aside.
She's been a massive savior in my life all the way around.
I can imagine.
So I'm just like, man, I don't know how the fuck I'm going to get through this game. I don't know how I'm going to do it. And then I sort of just had this thought. I look over to one of my teammates, another O-lineman, a guy who's a little older than me. And I'm like, dude, do you have anything that I can take to get through this game? And he says, well, I've got Adderall. And I say, all right. I knew what Adderall was. Obviously in college people had taken it. I never really took it. I think I took it one time in college, and didn't really think much of it. But so I was like, okay, well, what's the deal? And he's like, well, you have to have a therapeutic use exemption to take it. If you get tested tomorrow, you could fail and you'd be in, you could get suspended.
Right. Back then. Yeah. Well, still. Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, well, just give it to me. I'm desperate. I need it. So he gave me 2 of them. I took one and it was like I was brought back to life. I had energy in my body. I felt energized and excited and inspired and creative and connected. And I was going around the locker room, like getting all my teammates jacked up and amped up. And so I was like, man, this stuff makes me feel fucking great. This has given me new life. This has brought life back into my legs. At the time I was dealing with this back injury that had sciatica.
But it helped you.
Down my leg.
I'll tell you, it helped you because of the cumulative stress that you've put onto your brain, the cumulative effect of repetitive hits to the head. I've done a study, actually. We did a study, probably I'm going back to 2000 and it may have been 2015 on repetitive undiagnosed concussive injuries on preseason versus postseason. I mean, 55% of all the athletes in this study would not pass a concussion test. You're not passing a scat at all, after that. And so what happens with concussion is you lose the dopamine, and Adderall and Ritalin, they help to keep dopamine hanging around, and it's the feel good drug. And so it's not helping your back so much, but it's helping your focus, and it's giving you it's bringing back the dopamine that you fucking lost. So you feel like $1 million.
Yeah.
So what happened? So you liked it.
I started taking it. I got a therapist, and I said, dude, I need Adderall because I can't focus and I'm having a really difficult time. And so I got the prescription. I made it legit. I got the therapeutic use exemption, and then I started taking it. And I became super dependent on it. It went through this sort of wave of, it really helped me. Even Brittany, my wife, said, man, when you come home, I've got my husband back.
You can have a conversation. You can sit down and have focus.
Conversations. Yeah. You're like doing the dishes. You're fucking, taking care of stuff. You're connecting with me, etc. So it was really a positive thing for a little while.
I know how that feels. I have the same. When I started, it was the first time I took Ritalin, and I came home, and my mom tells me, it was the first time I've ever had a conversation with you where you actually listened to something I was saying. So I know that feeling, and that feeling of, wow, it feels good because other people are realizing it too. So you must, if you're feeling good,
Absolutely.
And then it goes, what? It's like, fuck it.
So then it became like, well, now I got to feel this way all the time. So eventually I was taking fucking a 70 milligram Vyvanse, which is like a time release throughout the day, and then stockpiled that with a couple 20 milligram chewable tablets later in the afternoon. So I was, and the problem is what I ran into, you start running into this fucking wall. And about 2 p.m., 3 p.m., you just fall off the face of this cliff.
Yeah.
Into depression, into sort of, your mind has just completely hit a wall.
Yeah.
And
the headaches come on.
My life became this constant cycle of just completing a to-do list.
Right.
And getting tasks done. And the connective aspect of it really kind of faded away, and I just descended into this robotic, mechanical way of being.
You lose your personality over the task-oriented self because you were so not used to doing tasks and completing them. Yeah. It felt so good to complete something. You just I get it, bro. I know how that, I think only somebody who's using it that often, gets it. But anyway, So you lose yourself.
Yeah. And, and then it became this cycle too of, by 5, 6 o'clock at night, now I'm like, well, now I got to start coming down. So I got to smoke a ton of weed. I start drinking wine, alcohol, whatever it is, to start coming down so that I can sleep. I wasn't sleeping very well, and then waking up at 5, 6 o'clock in the morning to start the cycle all over again.
Central alpha blockade. You got to shut off the stuff in your brain so that your blood pressure comes down. Yeah.
Exactly. So
it's not survivable.
So my last year in Chicago, it was a rough year. I had flown from Chicago back to LA with my family for the bye week, and my high school was retiring my jersey at this ceremony. I get there, and I'm feeling sick kind of all day. I'm feeling just off, and there's a pain in my gut, and I don't know what's going on. I can't really, I'm not throwing up. I feel like I have to shit, but I can't shit. And this descends this weekend that we're back home in LA for my jersey retirement at my high school. It descends, and all of a sudden, the day we're supposed to fly back, I'm like, and I had been basically in bed since the ceremony because I was in so much pain. We're 3 hours from heading to the airport to get our plane back home. And I'm just like, something's wrong. Something's wrong with me. So go to the ER. I have a ruptured appendix.
Oh, shit.
So I have to have an emergency appendectomy.
Yeah, you got to do
appendix
surgery.
removed.
Yeah.
I end up spending a week in the hospital. I lose about 30 pounds. I have to call the team, tell them what happened. They're like, holy shit, what the fuck?
Yeah, fuck.
So I fly home a week later, or I fly back to Chicago, get back with the team. I end up missing like the next month while I'm getting my weight back and sort of recovering. And in that time, I had run out of my Adderall prescription. And I was at the facility, and it was, going to be a long day of meetings and sort of standing around and, doing stuff because I couldn't really do anything.
Yeah.
And I went to one of my teammates who I knew had Ritalin. And I said, hey, brother, can I get a Ritalin? I'm out of my Adderall, and I just need something to get me through the day. God forbid I sit through a day of meetings without Adderall.
Right. Well, it's impossible. Like you'd feel like it's impossible that it's, you don't have the tools to be able to do it yourself yet,
Right.
So you got to, I get it.
And in my head, I thought, hey, it's Ritalin. It treats the exact same thing that I've been diagnosed with, which is ADHD. It's a similar, it's like a sister drug to Adderall. So even if I get a drug test and I test positive for it, I feel like I have a good argument, to avoid a suspension.
Yeah.
So I wasn't worried about it.
Right.
So I take the Ritalin, and it felt very similar to Adderall, maybe the same thing. Of course, that day, I get drug tested. I get picked for a drug test.
Yeah.
I go in, do the drug test. And it wasn't until I finish out that year, and it wasn't until sometime in January, the season had ended, I get a letter from the league saying you tested positive for Ritalin, and we're serving you a 4-game suspension for next year. And at the time, I was at the end of my second 1-year deal with the Bears. I had no contract coming up. I was going to be a free agent. So this really fucked up my prospects for the next year.
This is 2014.
So I went to fight it. The NFLPA did literally nothing to help me argue the case. When I met the woman who was in charge of arguing my case, I knew exactly why I didn't, because she didn't take fucking 2 seconds.
So they don't give a shit. No,
think about what argument I had. I at that point I had a good relationship with the guy who headed up the performance enhancing drug protocol unit.
Yeah.
This guy, Dr. Lombardo. And so, he was like, hey man, is there anything you can, and I explained to him the whole thing. And he said, well, it's tough, because you were still prescribed the Vyvanse and the Adderall, and they're looking at this as just a totally different drug, and there's really nothing we can do.
Huh.
So at that point, I was exhausted. I had already, after my last year in Jacksonville, which was 2 years prior, I was already ready to be done playing football.
Right.
I'd reached my limit with it. Just my body was beat to shit. I had a really bad back injury. My right foot, my legs had just gone to hell since the sciatica, this nerve damage that I had, which still to this day, I've got these sort of numb spots on the bottom of my foot and
it's something
toes.
that coaches never tell you about, because they tell you to just keep going and get back in, and you develop that warrior spirit that doesn't have the mindfulness behind it. And I want to talk to you about that moving for later on. But so you just keep on playing, and the injuries, and you look at the fucking pro athletes and even retired like amateur athletes and Olympians. 10 years after retired, some of them can't even move anymore. Like it's just it's fucking atrocious, really. Anyway, so
it's terrible, you know.
Yeah. So he asks you, is there anything else?
So I took it as, you know, the universe really providing me with an opportunity to walk away, you know. And so I started getting ready to retire. You know, I didn't really have it in me to keep playing. That year, my wife had just passed the bar in California, and I said, let's just move back to LA. You know, we'll take this thing one day at a time. Maybe I'll go back and play if I get any opportunities, any calls. But let's just set up shop in Los Angeles, where we're both from, and we'll take it from there. You know, you can start your practice as an attorney, and we can, you know, just figure it out. And so that off season, I got a number of calls from the Falcons, from the Bills. Actually, they wanted to bring me in to work me out and, you know, potentially sign me. And I couldn't even get on the plane. You know, right. I was like, the thought of just driving to the airport to go travel to work out for this team that might sign me. I just,
you're mentally done.
In me.
Yeah.
You know, I was completely done.
Yeah.
So that was it, man. And I started the long process of
healing.
Healing,
learning
and finding myself in life after football.
So were you always were you using cannabis in non-medical sense during your, you mentioned it a couple times, I've seen in passing that, you know, you were using, you know, large amounts of cannabis as well, but your advocacy, are you saying your advocacy for cannabis didn't really start until you realized, you know, fuck man, I've been using all these other drugs and maybe now it's time that, you know, I give cannabis a shot? Or did you always find that, like, how, you know, where did the cannabis, you know, advocacy angle come from? You know, if you were always using cannabis, you know, what, or the plant-based, I mean, you're an advocate of DMT, and psilocybin, which is where the world is now. But, you know, back then, you know, how did you come up, how did you bridge that maybe this is a better way. How did you bridge that mindfulness with that, with the athlete warrior spirit? How did you put those two together at that time? And how did cannabis play a factor in your recovery?
It's a good question. Well, it was in college where I really started to understand the regenerative properties of cannabis. Okay. And it was sometime after my true freshman year at Arizona, and the season had come to an end. And, you know, in college, it's really tough to use cannabis because there's constant threat of random drug tests.
Right.
Yes. So, you know, we were very wary and careful about our use of cannabis in college. But at some point we got the word through the grapevine that there would be no more tests for the end of the year. So it was like all the O linemen got together. There was a bonfire. Somebody had a J, and that thing started getting passed around. And, you know, I smoked some of it. And, you know, not only was that like this great bonding experience, you know, of the O-line brotherhood of us all coming together and, you know, this time after the season to sort of galvanize our you know, our brotherhood and our
it's a great way to come together. Yeah.
Camaraderie, etc. But I remember waking up the next day and I was like, holy shit, I feel so good. I feel like I got the best sleep I've got all year. I feel like if I had to go play football today, I could do it and I'd be awesome. You know, I felt regenerated and I was like, man, if I had drank a bunch of alcohol last night, I'd feel like shit today.
Right.
You know,
were you drinking much back then too?
Not really, not at that point. I mean, in college, it, you know, definitely alcohol became, you know, a go-to party,
Did you
enabler.
did you suffer from mental health? Like, I mean, if it was running in the family, and I find that a lot of athletes suffer from mental health too. Also, just because of the way they're coached through the go 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 mentality. Coaches always putting you down. Coaches, telling you this, that. You lead this life that's seems pretty straight and narrow. I find athletes suffer quite a bit. Do you think was that part of the drive to all of this other stuff?
Definitely, man.
Yeah, it's fucking impossible not to.
Yeah, I mean, I was I really viewed myself as the tip of the spear and an absolute, gladiator. So it didn't really the mental health stuff didn't really come into play until my NFL career.
Okay. Yeah.
Where I really started to descend into darkness because the dream of making it to the NFL had been realized, and I didn't have that mountain to climb anymore. So everything, this thing that I had perceived as being the answer to all my prayers, here I was realizing it, going, wait, this is it? I still don't feel fulfilled. I still don't feel like I've done anything. I still feel like I have everything in the world to prove, and I have to show everybody how fucking big and tough and badass I am still.
Right.
The hole was still there, So, so I started using more and more cannabis in my collegiate career. Again, like once I got word that the tests had come to an end for the year and that, it was safe to use cannabis. But then when you get to the NFL, there's only one test a year for quote unquote street drugs.
The 2 weeks before season, or at least it was. Yeah.
If you're lucky, you get tested sometime in April or May when, spring practices start. But otherwise, then you have to wait until just about the first week of training camp to get that annual street drugs test, or SOA, substances of abuse, as they call them, which is what cannabis is labeled under, except not anymore.
Right. They changed that recently. It's funny. I had a bunch of friends playing in the NFL. And actually, I was an assistant team doc in the CFL for about 5 years. And aside from just handing out like the fucking home plates, doc, at the end of every fucking game, you'd have the same 12 guys, usually the O-line, coming in and asking for they want their the circles with the slits, the Tylenol 3s, and then they want the home plates, which were the benzos, because somehow Baclofen and all these guys were helping them. They didn't even know the fucking names, and I told them to go home and smoke a joint, funny enough, because they weren't testing at that time in the CFL. That. I did. I had enough. Actually, I had most of the team at that time going home and smoking cannabis. They didn't like me very much, fair to say, the coaching staff, but my friends that are playing in the people I know in the NFL, they so you stay away from cannabis and drugs for 2 weeks prior to getting tested, and then it's just like game on. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. So
yeah, anyway, sorry, I digress.
No, not at all, man.
So cannabis becomes part of your life then.
Experience with cannabis as this great recovery tool.
Yeah.
Helped me deal with, the physical and mental stress of playing football really became apparent during my college career.
Interesting.
And then once I got to the NFL, it was like once I had that test, I just used cannabis as needed, which was basically just about every day.
So you're using cannabis every day. Did you use it prior to games or only during or only after games?
Later in my career, I started, using it before games. At that time, I think vapes started coming out.
That was my push for the vape. Yeah.
So it was I could be much more discreet, bringing it to hotel rooms and all that.
Do you think it helped you? Do you think it helped you during the game? Do you think cannabis is I know I can tell you the scientific aspect behind all this shit, but that's kind of boring. Do you think cannabis is enhancing medicine? It's just a tough question, because if you answer yes, you put it into a category, and you answer no, you put it into it's kind of, you're stuck. So I'm going to, what do you think?
I would say it's no more performance enhancing than a guy who's popping 3 Vicodin before a game, which guys are doing all the time. Yep. I did that. You know, this plant contains chemical compounds that our body produces, you know, through the endocannabinoid system. So, for me, it just helped me feel more in my body, you know, where the pharmaceutical stuff really, I felt, made my nervous system very shaky and put me into this, you know, physically and mentally agitated, irritated state. Cannabis didn't do that, and yet it still depressurized my system.
Were you using, during that time that you were, you know, playing, were you using opioids and narcotics as well? What made you drive into the advocacy for cannabis as a safer alternative? I mean, I know it's a safer, we all know it is. Was there a moment in time where you're like, fuck this, like enough of all this shit? Did a friend die? Were you seeing too much abuse? Like, did you have enough? Did you say, you're living now your highest life, you're retired? You're living your, you know, your spirit life? How, you know, was there a moment where you're like, fuck it? Or was it gradual?
For me, it was very, you know, all of this, my whole life really has been very intuitive, you know, and as an athlete, I've always been very intuitive with, you know, what I'm putting into my body and how it makes me feel. And from the time I was probably, I went to the dentist when I was a kid and had to have oral surgery, and after that they gave me Vicodin to come home, and I remember after that taking it for 3 days of prescribed use, recovering from this mouth surgery. I was already addicted. I was experiencing withdrawals. Crazy. I was like 16, waking up at, you know, 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning with this twisting pain in my gut and cold sweats and chills. And I didn't know what was happening. And I told my mom, she's like, oh, wow, you're experiencing withdrawal symptoms from that Vicodin. So opiates always had a very negative effect for me. And so later on in my NFL career, I had to have shoulder surgery. And I remember after that, taking the pills that they prescribed to me, and I was like so angry. I was in a just like I had this blind rage simmering just below the surface. I was super irritable. I was lashing out at the people who were around me because I was sort of dependent on my mom and my girlfriend to help me get dressed, to do everything for me. You know, I lost an arm. My back was still fucked up. Like, I was a mess, and I would take these pills and I thought, man, I'm not even myself. I'm snapping on people. I feel crazy, you know? And I realized it was every time after I took these painkillers. Yep. So I think by the time I got to Chicago, I wasn't taking opiates anymore because I just knew how terrible they made me feel. Not to mention, you know, waking up at 2 o'clock in the morning now because I couldn't sleep in my bed. I had to sleep in this recliner. I'd wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning just in complete cold sweats and chills. I was like, fuck this shit. I can't take this anymore. So I think by the time I got to Chicago, I wasn't using opiates anymore. You know, as far as anti-inflammatories go, I might have been taking an Advil here and there. But for the most part, cannabis became my go-to recovery tool and pain management tool.
And you found it effective. You found it effective mostly after your games. You'd use it maybe during the game just to help you relax. You find it no more effective than, you know, saying a Vicodin or an opioid. I mean, the experience that I find from athletes, it's such a range, you know. I do a lot of MMA stuff as well, and you know, and I talk to you know, athletes in MMA who find that cannabis, THC in particular, helps them with their mental focus. And when they're grappling, you know, grappling isn't fighting. Grappling is a chess game. You know this, and you speak to these guys. And same with boxing. You know, it helps them with that focus. And so there's always that question: is it a performance enhancing, drug? I don't think it is. I think it doesn't, it certainly doesn't do what Ritalin does, and it doesn't do what, doesn't cause those massive spikes that you get. And it basically just resets your own system, so it's, I think it should be legal on that, actually, like, baseball doesn't even test for it anymore. Basketball's no good. Football's coming around. What do you think? Like, based on that, what do you think?
Great. I think it's great. So I came out of the league. My last year was 2014. In 2015, I started writing. I started writing my ass off. Writing was always sort of my underlying art form that I would fall back on after my football career.
You're hitting people, and then you're saying, I'm fucking mindful. It's weird. You see that, right? You're like, I'm going to crush you, but then I'm going to do yoga. Like, it's a little
it's a process.
It's a process. Do you just turn it off? Like, fuck it. Like, now it's war, and now it's like it's peace and war. Like, anyway, you know what I mean?
No, I mean, talking to my brother, he's like, dude, you're not even the same guy you were.
Okay.
And my brother really sort of was he turned me on to meditation. I would see him, he'd come visit me, or, when I got done playing, he would, anytime, he might stay over the night or whatever it might have been. And in the morning, he would go into my backyard and meditate, and he'd be like, yeah, you should try meditating. I'd be like, I can't meditate.
Yeah. I say that every day. I can't do it.
I can't sit and meditate.
So how do you do it? How do you fucking do it?
And eventually I just sort of broke down and started doing it. I got back into yoga because for a long time through my football career, once I started getting injured, man, it was brutal to do yoga. It was so painful. It was excruciating. And I hated it. So I stepped away from yoga for a long time in my NFL career. And I really only came back to it when I got done. And then I started getting into meditation, and then it must have been maybe the first time I meditated. I was like, whoa, that's what I've been looking for, my whole life, when the smoking weed and consuming cannabis and all the other shit I've done, like, this is the feeling, this is the sensation, this is the realm I've been searching for, is this place I get to when I meditate.
It's that self-love you've been looking for. It's that.
Absolutely, man. And it's like complete peace and stillness and, a total, it's just a moment where you get to the absolute center of yourself, which we don't, we're so, in this world that we live in, we're so scattered, in a million different directions. We're thinking about the past and things we did yesterday. We're worrying about the future and what's going to happen tomorrow. We're thinking about how we're going to be successful. We're thinking about who we're supposed to be. We're thinking about all this, regrets, resentments, etc.
Yeah.
And where the fuck are you in all that?
Right. Not living present.
You're missing the ride, brother. Mm-hmm. So
do you think plant-based medicine helped you get there? Do you think the plants helped you get there, or it was always in you?
Cannabis, I mean, that was always sort of who I was, the blueprint of me, but at the same time, there's no question I diverged from the path throughout my football career,
right,
and got lost along the way. And cannabis was really, cannabis was always something that really brought me back. It always brought me back to my truth, to who I am, to what I am. And, I think that showed me the doorway back to myself, at the end of the day. So how did I get into cannabis advocacy? I wrote this big article for Sports Illustrated, and it really talked about dealing with injuries, my experience with Adderall and prescription pills, and sort of the machinery, the mechanism that is the NFL training room. And a little bit of that was talking about cannabis. And so, the article got a lot of pub. It went pretty far.
Yeah.
I even got phone calls from my old head trainer who was really pissed off and felt like I fucked him over and, said a bunch of stuff that wasn't true, which I was like, dude, you're out of your mind.
All
man.
Institutions will say the same shit, though. It's an institution, right?
Yeah. I was just like, dude, I didn't say anything that didn't happen. And
right.
To be honest with you, I didn't even really I wasn't throwing you guys under the bus. I laid out exactly what happened. I didn't really look at it as like, this was your fault at all,
right.
And I didn't name names, etc. And, so I thought that was pretty funny and telling also of like his fear of the situation and
guilt,
me sort of bringing a light to, what he was doing and other shit that he was worried about coming out. So after that, I got a call. I got hooked up with this guy, Kyle Turley, who was like always one of my childhood heroes, an all-pro offensive tackle, played for the Saints and the Rams and the Chiefs. He's famous for throwing a helmet into the stands after this D lineman was basically trying to kill his quarterback. And he was always one of my favorite players. And he at that time and had been really the tip of the spear in this cannabis conversation for football players. And I got on the phone because we had the same agent, and I got hooked up with him, and he said, Eb, I'm flying out to Phoenix tomorrow to go speak at this cannabis conference, and I want to invite you out. I'll fly you out. I'll give you a room. I want you to come and tell your story if you're willing. And at that time, I was like, well, yeah, it feels right. I don't know exactly what I'm going to say other than just kind of tell my story of how I used cannabis during my career and how I feel like it was a positive tool for me during that experience. So I go to this conference. I see the breadth of people that cannabis has had a positive impact on, from cancer survivors to military veterans to, these children with severe seizure syndromes, that cannabis has like eradicated their seizures and helped their families live a normal life and, get back to being able to live. And I'm like, wow. And I share my story, and I saw the effect it had, and people just resonating with people, and people being so thankful that someone who had the platform that I did playing in the NFL was willing and able to speak on their experience with this plant, because, there wasn't a whole lot of truth being told about it.
Especially in pro sport at all.
Especially, from the pro sports perspective. So next, Kyle starts talking. And he's sitting to my left. It was myself, Nate Jackson, Kyle Turley, and Ricky Williams were the four speakers on this panel.
Oh, wow.
And it must have been, it was probably the most filled conference I've to this day spoken at. There must have been 500 people in the audience.
Pretty big advocates there too then. You got Ricky Williams, you got like
Yeah. I mean, Ricky, you could say is sort of the face of cannabis in the NFL, because he actually kind of went up against the league during his playing career with his beliefs on cannabis and his stance, and he was always very solidified in it.
It's tough, man. It's tough, like, to be that person. It's tough.
He was
tough.
Ostracized and fucking exiled and brought back, and then
it's tough.
Put this shitter.
Yeah.
But so Kyle starts talking, and one of the first thing he reads is the federal government patent 6,630,507 on cannabinoids as neuroprotectants and antioxidants.
Yeah.
And he starts reading the sort of abstract of what this government patent says, which is that cannabinoids, the chemical compounds found in the cannabis plant, can help protect the brain from future damage and can also help the brain recover from a concussion or from trauma. And this just blew my fucking mind.
Yeah.
That there was actual scientific evidence, and not only that, but from the institution, the government body that has put cannabis into this totally demonized Schedule 1 classification, where it's completely illegal and stigmatized and demonized.
Yep.
And I'm like, here is this evidence that this plant is actually an incredibly powerful medicine. What in the hell? All of my experience, everything I've thought for the last, 10, 15 years, the me being worried about whatever, my cannabis use, my coaches finding out about it, being labeled a stoner, etc. It's like I was validated in my use, and I was like, man, I wasn't just making it up that this stuff made me feel better. It actually scientifically, chemically, it helps you heal and it helps protect you from damage.
Did it make you angry a little bit knowing that the government, by the way, you have a pretty good fucking memory. You named the entire patent. I know it is patent 507. I could never get any closer than that. But it didn't anger you that you've been lied to, that, the government and like that the whole institution of everything, people just close their fucking eyes. Sorry, Mom, I'm swearing a lot again. I just, when I get angry, the institutions want to close your eyes because they're pushing their own damn agenda. But the government, your own government at the same time, and our governments, every government, North American governments, basically just blindfolded, basically lied to us and told us all this shit. You had no anger towards them for that at that time when I
was very angry.
Yeah.
I was very angry.
Yeah, I'm still angry.
It lit the fire that led to this.
All right.
Today, I was super angry. It lit this fire of a thirst for knowledge and understanding more, and going deeper into this, and solidified my advocacy and my belief and my stance in this truth that this medicine could be a benefit to my brothers, playing football. And it really remains to be the most important medicine for football players. At the end of the day, there is no other substance on the planet that is as powerful a neuroprotectant as cannabis. And, football players, the number one issue is brain trauma, concussions, this stuff called CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, which is basically early onset dementia, Alzheimer's, etc., because of this plaque that builds up in the brain after all of these concussive and subconcussive hits. And so, the NFL needs to take this shit seriously. And they really have. This year in their latest CBA, they said they weren't going to suspend players any longer for cannabis use, which I thought was a massive win. I think they have to play another game or two now, but
because everybody gets to come back. Well, I think they're still going to suspend them on their fourth go, but at least they have like so many different options. Is
that the official rule?
Yeah, I think it's first go is it's you're going into treatment. Second go is a fine. Third go is a 4-game suspension. Some shit like that. But at least it's not you're suspended right away, and it's treatment and suspension.
It has been. But I thought they took it off.
I'm pretty sure they changed it to that. That's what I'm pretty. It's still there. You're still going to get a suspension, but not for a long time. You have to test positive a whole bunch of times now, at least in May. So
headway there.
Yeah, but they are making headway. I agree with you. It's nice to know that there's an athlete out there who there's a bunch of athletes obviously now, but somebody who comes from pro football and had all these things going on to start advocating in that way. And then you started a podcast, I used to listen to it, The Mindful Warrior you started, and I think, it's so important for athletes and for kids, for any like anybody growing up through the system to know that just because you're an athlete doesn't mean you have to, toe that line. There's always going to be somehow there's going to be there's a medium in there. And I think you found that over time. And I think that's why athletes look up to you and why you play such an important role in finding the balance between mindfulness and perseverance, or that spirit, that athlete spirit that's so driven but doesn't think of self very often. It's thinking of the goal and the identification of you as if I have to identify myself as an athlete, that's all I am as an athlete. What happens when that's removed from me? Who am I now? And that's what you seem to have found. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, going back to that, your initial question, who is Eben? I mean, you're a human being first.
Yeah.
Playing sports and being an athlete is something you do.
Right.
That's not who you are.
Right.
That's not, what you are. Yeah. And we get so and this is part of the conscious evolution that I've been going through and continue to go through is, at the end of the day, anytime you start to identify yourself as something, that puts you in a position to identify everyone else as being outside of you, other than you. You start to build judgments and have perspective on what everybody else is doing, rather than just focusing on who you are at the core of your being and what you're all about. Like for me, it doesn't really matter who I am or what I am. It's about pushing the envelope of consciousness and thinking around who we are and what this is all about, and spreading positivity and light into the world that helps people better understand themselves. Because we're in this fucking, civilization in many ways has been, one of the great inhibitors of human consciousness, because it's created this system where everything is compartmentalized.
Yeah.
And in the grand scheme of life, nothing is compartmentalized. Nothing can be compartmentalized. You can't go out and treat someone like shit, be an angry asshole, living your life, and then come home and expect to have peace in yourself.
Well, that's why I find it so conflicting as you're standing on the offensive line, ready to beat the shit out of somebody, and come home to this, like...
Well, I wasn't at that time.
Right, exactly. You've developed into that. But do you think if you got back on the field right now, you could put that into a compartment? And do you think you'd be able to take somebody down like that? Do you think you'd be able to play the game with the same,
Yeah. Because
whatever?
At the end of the day, it's an art form, That's what martial arts are all about, It's about discipline.
Yeah.
It's about, stepping into this realm which requires certain aspects of you but it's like coming into it with your whole self.
But knowing you can step out of it. But knowing that it doesn't define who you are, and you can now...
once you have that, because, look, the NFL and the game of football preys upon men who come from troubled backgrounds and come from, similar situations to me and worse, because it creates this warrior mentality. And without the sort of underlying spiritual foundation of understanding who you are and the grander scheme of what you are,
right,
you get sucked into this identification and this ideology of being a football player and being a warrior. So it becomes really difficult, and those lines get blurred when you're coming home. That's why you see so much alcoholism and drug abuse and domestic violence in football players off the field, because it's really difficult to turn that switch off at the end of the day.
But to know that...
Especially after 10 plus years of doing it.
But that, so now, I think as a role model for others coming out of it, knowing that it's doable and seeing where you've come and going from athlete to advocate to business to all these things you're doing. Look what you're doing now. You're doing you started the Hotboxin with Tyson and you must love that, by the way. It's
fun. Yeah, it's super fun. That's even been like a massive ego trip turned ego death turned.
How do you deal with that?
Lesson in identification,
right,
etc. It's a constant letting go, man.
Yeah.
It's a constant letting go. Life is all about just continuing to let go, because the minute you start holding on to shit, and the minute you start, identifying yourself or expecting that there be more or demanding more of yourself, etc. And I'm not saying, you should have, the only way we find freedom is through vigilance and discipline, and that's what the freedom.
Sound like
I'm
religion.
This,
so you sound like religion there, man. That's what, religion preaches that shit. Put the yoke of God in front of you and you'll be free. I don't know. I came from a very religious background.
No. I am repulsed by organized religion.
Yeah.
Trust
Okay.
me. But there is a higher intelligence and a
Fair.
spirit that flows through all things and all beings.
Fair.
You know,
I agree.
that is the universe. I mean, we came out of the earth. You know, we have this other idea that we're separate from everything in nature and the universe. We are an aspect of it.
Yeah. Yep.
You know, and so with that, you also have a purpose on this planet.
Yeah.
And in your lifetime, you have a purpose that you must fulfill. And a lot of us are, you know, have, like I said, you've thrown all of these coverings over yourself, all of these veils, all of these identifications, these resentments, these frustrations, etc., that inhibit you from fully expressing your truth and who you are and your purpose in this place. And you only reach greatness, your own personal greatness that you are destined for, through vigilance and discipline. And that means fucking working at it.
Yeah, you have to work. I totally agree. You know, it's funny. I was just reading that. I just read the 5 a.m. Club. You know.
Oh yeah.
I mean, waking up
right over there.
Well, it was, you know, it's excellent. The idea, I mean, maybe 5 a.m. isn't for everybody. I work night shift pretty much my whole life. So my working life anyway, so I'm usually going to bed at 7 in the morning. But, you know, the idea is finding that routine when, you know, doing something outside of what most other people are doing and sticking to that. And really, you know, 95, you want to be different, don't do what everybody else is doing. You know, most people do one thing. Most people are all, like you said, are scattered, and they don't have that vigilance or that discipline to be, you know, super, not just successful and outside, but successful within and finding out who they are. How do you keep your, I mean, just on the, like, you know, you just started mentioning, how do you, you know, keep your ego in check, bro? You're like, you're doing this really awesome shit now. You've got I mean, Hotboxin is massive. It's great. And you produce this thing, you know, I listened to some things, how you, you know, you've already spoke about how you met Tyson, how, you know, you showed up and you keep showing up. And actually that's the warrior spirit. You know, you keep showing up and shit happens. How do you keep yourself in check? You know, you've got to tell there's people out there that, you know, ego is probably the largest problem we deal with today. You know, it's all about self. It's the ego. How do you keep yourself in check, knowing all this stuff, all these, you know, awesome, you're meeting some fucking cool people, and you know, how do you keep it all in check?
Well, for me, it's just been, to be honest, it's been a lot of hard lessons.
Yeah.
Learning that whenever I'm driven by my ego, driven by how much success I have, how much money I'm making, how much recognition I'm getting, it leads to just pain and destruction.
Yeah.
Because it's never good enough. It's never fucking enough, ever.
Right.
It will never be enough for your ego. There will constantly be something more, something better, something higher, you know, something that you're missing, something that you're lacking.
Yeah.
So that's number one, you know. And then how do you keep your ego in check? Well, for me, you know, I've really found my purpose, which is to spread positivity and light into the world. And what that means for me is expressing the truth that's in my heart.
Right.
You know, like when I talk about cannabis, I'm not talking about cannabis because, you know, I want to sound really cool and interesting, and I want, you know, I think that everyone should be able to get stoned and get high. I'm talking about cannabis because it's a fucking spiritual, heartfelt truth that must be expressed through this vessel that is Eben.
Yeah.
You know, and that comes down to everything. Like the moment I get sidetracked with, oh man, I need my own fucking podcast. Why am I not getting the recognition I deserve hosting Hotboxin with Mike Tyson? Why am I not being praised and recognized for how much, you know, there wouldn't be a fucking show without me. You know, the minute I get into that type of thinking, it's destructive, and it causes me more and more pain. The minute I let go and I say, I am a facilitator of this podcast, I am the aspect of this show that creates an environment where conversations can unfold, and I step out of myself and I just step into the process of the doing, shit just starts to flow. The universe fucking starts to open up. The universe starts to pour in opportunities, pour in abundance and love and gratitude, the shit that's just eternal and infinite, man.
Yeah.
You know, when you're doing something for the absolute sake of just loving what you're doing, that's when you know you're in the right place, you know. And that, you know, a lot of people go, well, that's really easy for you to say. You're a football player who's made millions of dollars. Trust me, dude. When I came out of the NFL, I didn't have a fucking cent.
Yeah.
I've been completely bankrupt. I've had rent payments due a week from having $0 or negative money in my bank account, you know. And it's not, you know, at the end of the day, man, you can make millions of dollars. I had millions in the bank. I had the fucking big ass house. I had the BMW. I had it all. And I was fucking miserable.
Right.
I was miserable. I was doing it for everyone else. I was doing it because I had to prove to the world how fucking big and tough and badass I was.
Turning inwards is so hard
because of all my childhood trauma. You know, I had to show everyone how fucking awesome I was. You know, and it led me nowhere. It led me to a dead end. You know, and you know, all the spiritual gurus, they talk about this shit, and it's not something mystical. It's not magical. We're all just sort of caught up in the trip of, you know, Western ideology, which is, you know, become rich and famous and make tons of money and live the American dream, which is all fucking fabrication.
Because that's what social media shows us, you know?
Exactly, dude. That's why I use my social media to spread truth and light into the world, you know? Let's talk about how we're fucking feeling, man. Let's talk about the root of who you are.
Yeah.
You know? Everyone's running away from fear and anxiety and sadness and grief. It's like, dude, you're never going to run fast enough to get away from those things. Those are innate human experiences. So why don't we just take the time to acknowledge it, respect it, feel it, and see what we can learn from it?
Because then you have to turn inwards. And then you have to really look at yourself, and you have to ask yourself all those tough questions that ayahuasca pulls out of you. And
exactly, dude.
And it's tough.
Well, you know, that's part of the, you know, the waking up.
Right.
You know, for being a human.
Yeah.
Because we've just been really disillusioned with this fucking mystical and amazing experience that is being a human. Like, what a fucking miracle you are.
Yeah, every day.
You know, what a miracle you are that you were birthed into this fucking world, man. God, it's like 1 in a billion chances, you know, that your father's sperm hits your mother's egg. Like, people are dying to get pregnant in this world and never do, you know, and here you are. So what are you going to do? What are you going to do with that?
What are you going to do? That's, you know, you raise amazing, like, you raise amazing points. Honestly, you're a light for so many people out there. And like, whether you're an athlete, not an athlete, looking for direction in business, in athletics, or just fucking whatever, you've been through so much, and I fully get it. I mean, I get that there's so much, it's so hard. It's a struggle every single day, you know, for so many people who don't want to look at themselves, or, you know, even when they haven't, like, you're an example of, you know, perseverance in the idea of being, or tenacity, actually, of being so tenacious that, you know, fuck it, like, you know, where's that level? When do you feel successful? Where's that bar of success? And you're defining it for yourself. That's coming from who you are and not all the things that are around you. And to know that you struggled and came through all of those processes gives a lot of hope to other people. And you know, I got to tell you, it comes through in your podcasting now. It comes through in all those ways. And I know everybody out there appreciates it. it comes through in your dynamic with how you interact with not just like the guests there, but with Mike himself. And like, we know, like, at least, you know, for the people that know you, at least, you know, over the years, where the where you're going and, you know, what you're doing. We look up to you as yeah, that's something that's attainable to find that mindful balance. And that's fucking cool, because that's what the mindful warrior is. And you've translated it in my mind to your business life. And fuck, man, that's amazing. I really appreciate you coming on here today and having such
time. I'd love to come on again.
Yeah, that was an awesome conversation, bro. Like, anything you want to plug? Anything you want to shout out?
Check me out on Instagram and Twitter at EDS Britton. That's Ed's Britton. That's Eben Daniel Smith Britton. Check me out on Instagram and Twitter. I'm always posting good stuff. Check out my website, ebenbritton.com. You can check out my writing and my thoughts and practices, and, you know, just trying to share the things that I have, you know, the tools I use and the things I have, the practices and rituals I've come to know to help me achieve success. And by success, I mean, you know, how present in the process and in the moment can you possibly be? And, you know, that's really what's going to carry you, man. If you can just find your love and gratitude for the moment and life and the people around you, and, you know, to live in your greatness.
I love it. Thank you so much, bro. Such awesome lessons. I read all your shit, you know,
man.
And your blog that's on your website. I've read all those articles. Fuck, I'd love to get into your past and all
Next
your,
time.
yeah,
Next
for
time
sure.
we'll do
Because
it.
we're not going to get into it today, but I want to know, like, the idea of, you know, you're pretty stoic. You probably live a stoic mindset a little bit, but then,
Yeah.
you know, but then at the same time, the Stoics killed your ancestors.
Yeah,
You know,
I know.
it's a tough reconciliation. Anyways, that's for another time, bro.
Absolutely.
You know, Marcus Aurelius wasn't the greatest guy, you know, but he was to his own people, maybe.
Yeah, he was tenacious, dude.
He was, yeah. Thank you so much for coming on, bro. I really appreciate
Thank
it.
you, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, let's do it. Like, I'd love to do it again and get into it.
Absolutely, bro.
Beauty. Let's stay in touch.
You too, man. Thank
Peace.
you.
Thank you. See ya. Thanks, everybody.